I want to thank every one of you who is here today, who came from far and near to look back on Rudi's life today with us. My name is Beatrix Ahlswede Lugin, and I was married to Rudi Ahlswede from 1970 until 1984. Rudi and I are the parents of Alexander, who will speak to you later. I especially want to thank my son for inviting me to speak to you today. The invitation gave me great pleasure, and I consider it an honor. Rudi's death was sudden. There was no warning, no time to consider, to right wrongs, to express love and thanks. He left us quickly and undramatically. We've come together here today to reclaim a moment of closeness with him, which death snatched away. Through our presence, through the power of our remembrance, we evoke Rudi back into our world for this brief moment. Preparing this talk, I found myself pondering the question again and again, how to go about this. A human being is so complex. Of all the myriad possibilities, moments, experiences, selves, of which we consist, which ones do we choose to share? What does one say? Isn't it anything that we say a reduction, a limiting of this particular human being's complexity? Is not our life a work of algebra in which we ponder the great X, the mystery of our lives? And so I realized that I really can't talk to you about Rudi, because I don't know Rudi. Even after all these years of experience with him, living with him, being in a family with him, I don't know Rudi. All I know is my Rudi, my experience of him. The Canadian writer Margaret Atwood gave this advice to aspiring young writers. She said, "Say what is yours to tell. I will say what is mine to tell." I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. No sooner are these words spoken than Mark Antony, of course, begins to do just that, praise Caesar in Shakespeare's historical drama. Nevertheless, I pondered the distinction. How does one speak of the dead? If we praise, we end up speaking only of the nice, the pleasant attributes, a kind of Rudi Ahlswede light version. Those of us who spent time with Rudi know that this was not his way. Rudi's interaction with life was passionate. He loved not wisely, but too well. He was not given to strategic behavior, even though it would have perhaps been wiser at times. On the other hand, the dead are defenseless. They relinquish to us the power of definition, for we are still alive to tell the tale. Looking into my heart, I asked myself, what is it that you want? The answer that I found was this. I want to honor Rudi's life here today with you, and I want to acknowledge the complexity of his being. But what does it mean to acknowledge someone? The Oxford Dictionary says that to acknowledge means to take something which has been previously known to us and which we now feel bound to lay open or make public. It means to recognize a particular quality or relationship which we forgot or did not consciously see. And it means to own with gratitude. What did I know then and wish to lay open now? Which qualities did I forget or not consciously see? What can I own with gratitude? Of the rich tapestry of Rudi's life, where do I begin? We cannot remember the entire sequence of a life. We remember moments, special moments, which, for some reason, stayed in our memory. I will share with you some of these moments. Thinking of Rudi, an image of a great mountain range comes to my mind, with invincible summits, terrifying plunges and depths, and a smattering of meadows in between. This image has been the defining core of my relationship with Rudi, which began in our first meeting in the summer of 1967 in Columbus, Ohio. I was 18 years old and had just begun my freshman year at Ohio State University. He was 29 years old and starting his first job in the US as an assistant professor of mathematics. At this time, explosions were rocking the social and political fabric of American society. Afro-Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, and other groups were claiming their rightful place. And protest against the Vietnam War was flaming up everywhere, even in politically conservative Ohio. I frequented a bar known as Larry's in Columbus on High Street, refuge to those who considered themselves left-wing, or at least to the political left of the mainstream. In this bar, classical music, jazz, and soul music was played. People of different races and nationalities congregated in cheerful bawdiness, and of course, chess was played. A mutual friend at Larry's bar introduced us, and between long silences in which he scrutinized his chess partner's moves, Rudi told me a little about himself, about his fascination with his research, information theory, and the discoveries he was making about life in the United States. The more I became embroiled in the political demonstrations against the Vietnam War, the more Rudi became interesting for me. My fellow demonstrators and I quoted Ho Chi Minh, Mao Zedong, and Marx, but Rudi had actually read some of Karl Marx's writings, and he was able to put these writings into a philosophical context, showing the evolution of Hegel's and Feuerbach's ideas. This impressed me greatly, and I was stunned by the breadth of his knowledge. I began to pay closer attention to him. Not only had he read philosophy, but also literature, finding his own favorite writers and poets. In a conversation, he would suddenly, just at the right moment, quote Schiller or Gottfried Benn, Goethe, Shakespeare, Thomas Wolfe, or Nietzsche. I was amazed, for he refuted all my conceptions of typical mathematicians. He told me more about himself. His parents owned a large farm in northern Germany. Born the second son, he realized early in life that, much as he loved the countryside with its wide open spaces, hills and cliffs and forests, he would have to leave it, as the farm would not be able to support two families. This realization was painful for him. It forced him at a very early age to learn to create his own future. There's a line from a song by Billie Holiday, which for me captured his situation as a child. God bless the child that's got his own. Rudi was such a blessed child. He had his own. He found his new world at school. His home became the world of books, the world of learning, and his aptitude in mathematics became apparent. At the age of 10, he left his parents' home and lived with another family in a nearby larger town where he could attend the gymnasium, the secondary school, which would prepare him for a university education. Later, at gymnasium, he often felt excluded because of his background as a farmer's child. Some of his fellow students let him feel very clearly that he was lacking in social graces, that he came from an inferior social background. I think he never quite got over the pain of this discrimination. Learning became his passion. And this path led him from his humble elementary school in Dielmissen to the greatest universities in the world. He had a fire in his mind, and this made conversations with him scintillating. This was the terrain where our minds met and where I fell in love. Many evenings, watching him sit in the turmoil of Larry's bar, he exuded a quality of tranquility. He was above the fray, either focused on his chess game or in communion with his own thoughts, which he would occasionally add to the paper lying before him. He clearly had something which very few others in the room had, a world of his own. He seemed incredibly strong and rooted in himself. Occasionally he would sit up, take notice of the life teeming around him, and then return again to this other, for him so fascinating world. This fascination with the world of mathematics became particularly clear one evening in the spring of 1970. Richard Nixon had just announced the invasion of Cambodia. At universities around the country, massive strikes as a form of resistance took place. Soon the campus at Ohio State became a battleground. Tanks rolled through the streets, students erected barricades and threw bricks and Molotov cocktails. Helicopters flew overhead, spraying the demonstrators with tear gas. Rudi and I sought refuge in the McDonald's on High Street, where we found Rudi's colleague, Bogdan Bajshansky, also seeking shelter from the tear gas. Demonstrators ran into the McDonald's, followed by nightstick-brandishing police. We fled back onto the streets. In front of me, I saw Rudi and Bogdan running from the police, jumping over barricades, clearly illuminated by the searchlights of the helicopters flying over our heads, throwing more tear gas in our direction. Stumbling blindly behind them, I noticed that as they ran, they were deep in conversation about the four-color conjecture. A short time later, Rudi had been stopped in the middle of the night while driving home for making a right turn without a full stop. Because of an outstanding traffic violation, he was arrested and let off in handcuffs. I scrambled to find $200 with which to bail him out. When I arrived at the jail in the early morning, Rudi emerged smiling. He told me about the interesting evening he had spent stuffed in a holding cell with his fellow inmates. And he told me proudly he had gotten a new idea in jail which led to a significant breakthrough in the paper he was currently writing. Years later, I read in a book written by someone who was researching happiness that the happiest people are those who have something in their lives which so absorbs them that it permits them to completely forget themselves in the world around them. This process of forgetting oneself is called flow. I think Rudi spent much of his life in this state. But of course, this obliviousness to his surroundings left him vulnerable. Many a date began with long searches in the parking lots around the mathematics department. Rudi simply could not remember where he had left the car that morning. Between us, this was of course often a cause of exasperation on my part. But one day, in a store, I noticed two young salesgirls giggling about Rudi, who was lost in space, smoking and running his hands through his hair. A fierce determination to protect him in this vulnerability was born in me at that moment. In this way, Rudi was like no one I had ever met. Years later, after we had moved to Germany, listening to my son and his friends recount funny anecdotes about Rudi, I realized that they were fascinated by precisely his way of being different from others, his eccentricity, to use another word. The word eccentric comes from the Greek words ekkentros, meaning not having the same center. Rudi had a different center than most people. After we had married, I stood in a market square with Rudi in Sicily, in the town where the great Archimedes had lived. He was killed when a Roman soldier accosted him in the marketplace where he sat, drawing designs in the sand. Awed by Archimedes' fame, the soldier asked if there was anything he could do for him. Archimedes is said to have answered, "Don't disturb my circles." The story impressed me greatly, for I was sure that Rudi would have given the same answer, and I recognized that he was a kindred spirit. Shortly after we met, Rudi returned to Germany for a few weeks. He wrote to me that he was reading a book by Giordano Bruno entitled Heroic Passions. It seemed so fitting. Years later, when we lived in Rome, we spent many an hour at the Campo dei Fiori, where Bruno was burned at the stake for refusing to renounce his scientific ideas. I had no doubt that Rudi would have ended there too had he lived in this time. Rudi was never politically correct. He said what he thought, and he bore the consequences. Rudi was the freest person I have ever met. I saw Rudi for the last time on his birthday last year, September 15th, 2010. We spent the evening together drinking a bottle of wine and talking of our son, of mutual old friends. The years passed by before our inner eyes. He was, as always, excited about life, looking forward to the new research he had embarked upon, and which he told me about, as always, with sparkling eyes. But something was also different about this evening. After he finished talking, he asked me about myself. Amazed, I found myself telling Rudi about my life and my plans. He listened with a care and an attention that was new. We sat side by side, companions of a shared life. I walked home elated, feeling blessed and rich from this evening with Rudi. Standing at his coffin in the cemetery, looking at his dead body, with my son, I realized there was only one thing left to say to Rudi. Thank you.